Today, I bring you a film that intertwines fairy tale and grim realities, a masterpiece of dark fantasy, Pan's Labyrinth. The story is woven along two apparent narrative threads and one subtle, often overlooked strand. Let's delve into these layers, but be warned, spoilers lie ahead. The story is set in 1944. Although the Spanish Civil War has ended, guerrilla fighters continue to battle the government forces in resistance to tyranny. Ophelia's father died in the Civil War, and her mother, Carmen, remarried a captain in the government army and is pregnant with his child. They are on their way to join her stepfather. Ophelia, a child who loves fairy tales, often immerses herself in a world of her own fantasies. During a stop due to her mother's morning sickness, Ophelia wanders around and finds a stone shaped like an eye and a statue missing its eye. After she places the stone back, a stick insect emerges from the statue's mouth, capturing her attention. As they prepare to resume their journey, Carmen instructs Ophelia to greet her stepfather politely. Although there's no traffic, Captain Vidal comments that they are 15 minutes late upon their arrival. Captain Vidal greets them with a smile, his first action to touch his wife's belly, seemingly more eager to welcome the unborn child than his wife. He insists Carmen use a wheelchair, although she says it's unnecessary. His tone caring yet firm. That initial meeting between him and Ophelia is somewhat cold, though it doesn't seem to affect Ophelia too much. Soon after, the stick insect captivates Ophelia again, and she runs deep into the woods where she finds a stone labyrinth. Just as she's about to explore, the housekeeper Mercedes warns her not to get lost. Before they can talk further, Captain Vidal calls Mercedes back. Mercedes tells Ophelia, "Your father asked for me," but Ophelia responds, "He's not my father. My real father was a tailor who died recently." Back inside, Captain Vidal's troops are part of the government forces stationed at this mill, tasked with eliminating all resistance in that area. His strategy involves hoarding all supplies to lure the guerrillas into a trap. While they and others plan their strategy, Mercedes secretly observes. Meanwhile, Dr. Ferrero is busy tending to Carmen, who is weak, and prescribes her a sleeping potion that helps her rest well at night. Ophelia carefully stores the potion, which I will explain further later. Outside the room, Mercedes whispers to the doctor about someone she knows who's injured and needs help. Without much thought, the doctor gives her a small box and leaves. Mercedes holds the small box in her hand. Just then, she turns around and finds Ophelia standing silently behind her. Watching her and the doctor, they share a moment of silent eye contact. Then Ophelia returns to the house without saying a word. At this moment, Dr. Ferrero reports Carmen's condition to Captain Vidal, pointing out the risks of her traveling in her advanced stage of pregnancy. However, the captain shows no reaction to the doctor's concerns, firmly stating, "My son must be born by my side." Puzzled by his certainty, the doctor asks, "Why are you so convinced that the baby is a boy?" At that moment, the captain's men apprehend a suspicious father and son. After a brief search, the captain hastily concludes that they are guerrillas. The young man pleads urgently, explaining they were merely peasants out hunting rabbits. However, the captain doesn't believe them and ruthlessly executes both the father and the son. It's only after they are killed that he finds a rabbit in their belongings. Although the captain verbally chastises his men to search more thoroughly before accusing anyone, his cold and indifferent departure speaks volumes. His lack of remorse for killing the wrong people is chillingly clear. Cutting back to the interior, it's clear that Ophelia never understood why her mother remarried and brought her to this place. Her mother, Carmen, explains that she has always felt unbearably lonely. Ophelia, however, can't comprehend that she's been by her mother's side all along, so why does her mother still feel lonely? While they were talking, the baby in Carmen's belly started kicking again. Carmen asked Ophelia to tell a story to calm the baby. Ophelia began with a tale about an eternal rose. High up in the distant mountains, there was an eternal rose. Anyone who picked it would gain immortality, but the rose's thorns were poisonous, so no one dared to go near it. Ophelia thought it was such a shame. People always talked about the pain of living, but no one was brave enough to seek eternal life. A rose, capable of miracles, was left to wither slowly in the mountains, forgotten by everyone. Late at night, Ophelia was awakened by a strange noise. She bravely got up to investigate and saw the stick insect she had seen earlier that day. Delighted, Ophelia started talking to it, half-jokingly asking if it was a fairy and even showing it her fairy tale book. To her amazement, the stick insect transformed into a fairy. It then led Ophelia back to the stone labyrinth she had visited during the day. They descended the steps and reached the bottom, where there was nothing but a stone tablet. Ophelia called out, and suddenly a creature with the face of a man and the body of a goat appeared. Despite its strange appearance, it didn't frighten Ophelia, who was well versed in fairy tales. The creature introduced itself, saying, "I may look like a goat, but I am Fawn, the shepherd god, your most loyal servant." Ophelia was bewildered, but Fawn continued, "Things are not always as they seem. First, you are not just a regular girl. You are Princess Moana of the Lost Underground Kingdom, born of the moon, which is marked by the birthmark on your left shoulder. Second, the king of the Underground Kingdom has ordered to welcome the princess back. This is the entrance to the underground realm. If you pass the tests, you can return and reclaim your title. Third, you must complete 3 tasks before the moon is full." Fawn handed Ophelia a book called the Book of Crossroads in a small pouch, explaining that this would guide her. When Ophelia opened the book, she found it blank. She looked up again, but Fawn had vanished. The next day, Captain Vidal planned to host a dinner party, inviting influential local dignitaries. Carmen told Ophelia to take a bath and put on a clean, beautiful dress to make a good impression in the evening. As Ophelia was about to take her bath, she opened the Book of Crossroads. To her amazement, intricate illustrations and text began to appear on the previously blank pages. As Ophelia became engrossed in the book's contents, her mother knocked on the door, reminding her to get dressed up for the dinner. At that moment, Ophelia glimpsed the moon-shaped birthmark on her shoulder in the mirror, further convincing her that she was indeed the princess. The scene shifts to Mercedes, who is preparing for the dinner party with the other servants. She discreetly tucks a dagger into her waistband. Looking up, she sees Ophelia, beautifully and elegantly dressed, entering the room. Mercedes feels a surge of affection and tells Ophelia that she truly looks like a princess. In fact, the design of Ophelia's dress in the film is a clear homage to Alice in Wonderland, and Ophelia's experiences to come bear a resemblance to Alice's adventures. Ophelia asks Mercedes if she believes in fairies. Mercedes replies that she used to believe in them when she was a child, but now she can't. Ophelia, not catching the deeper meaning in Mercedes' words, just feels that Mercedes understands her better than her mother does. She then tells Mercedes about her encounter the previous night. Mercedes warns her that her mother always told her to be careful of the phone. Before they can talk more, Captain Vidal interrupts them to prevent supplies from reaching the rebels. Captain Vidal stores the newly arrived provisions in one place and decides that from now on, people will need a ration card to get their supplies, 1 per person. Mercedes looks at the piles of medicine with longing in her eyes. Sensing something unusual, the captain takes the key to the storeroom and, after confirming it is the only one, says he will keep it himself. At that moment, one of the soldiers spots smoke in the distant forest. Captain Vidal assumes it must be the rebels and immediately leads his troops to investigate. Although they don't catch anyone, the warm embers of the campfire help the captain estimate the rebels' departure time and their approximate numbers. He also finds a small box, the same one Dr. Ferrero gave to Mercedes, containing antibiotics for treating the wounded. It becomes clear that Mercedes has been secretly aiding the rebels, though Captain Vidal doesn't know this yet. Meanwhile, as Captain Vidal pursues the rebels, Ophelia is also on a mission. According to her book, a fig tree deep in the forest, known as the Tree of Life, has been withering since a giant toad took residence in its roots. Ophelia's task is to eliminate the toad to revive the fig tree. She's equipped with 3 magic stones for this first mission: kill the toad and retrieve a key. Without much hesitation, Ophelia removes her new dress and crawls into the dark, damp roots of the tree. The area is muddy and crawling with insects. After a short crawl, she encounters the giant toad. Realizing that reasoning with the toad is futile, she decides to outsmart it. She combines the magic stones with bugs, forming a bait that the toad eagerly devours. The toad convulses and then vomits, revealing the golden key as her reward for completing the task. Having taken her first step toward reclaiming her position as a princess, Ophelia needs to return home quickly. Her mother, Carmen, is worried about her, and Mercedes has searched everywhere. But Captain Vidal is unconcerned. His priority is the upcoming dinner party, which he treats like a political rally. At the dinner, Vidal addresses the current situation, explaining that each family now needs a ration card to receive supplies. He points out that the lack of food and medical supplies for the injured will soon become critical. Displaying the confiscated antibiotics, he makes the doctor visibly anxious. Aside from the doctor and Mercedes, the guests try to show their support and loyalty to Vidal. Mercedes seizes the opportunity to sneak out, using her lantern to signal the rebels in the forest. At that moment, she notices Ophelia returning, covered in mud. Back at the dinner, a lady starts gossiping, asking about Vidal's love story. Carmen begins to share, but Vidal rudely interrupts her. When Mercedes brings news of Ophelia's return, Carmen becomes anxious and insists on checking on her daughter. Vidal stands up with all the men, signaling their respect, though it's more about showcasing his own status. At the end of the dinner, an officer attempts to flatter Captain Vidal by bringing up his father. He mentions that Vidal's father was a general who died on the battlefield, smashing his pocket watch on a rock so his son would know the exact time of his death and understand what it means to die in battle. The watch that Captain Vidal constantly checks is presumably this very keepsake from his father. Vidal, however, rebuffs the officer's comment, seemingly to assert his own invincibility and determination, never to meet the same fate as his father. Perhaps feeling slighted at the dinner, Carmen scolds Ophelia for her behavior, telling her that Captain Vidal is also disappointed in her. But Ophelia just smiles. After freshening up, she takes the golden key to find Fawn. Seeing her interest in the stone statue, Fawn begins to explain that the figures depicted on it are of him and her. When Ophelia asks about the child she's holding in the statue, Fawn avoids the question, as if hiding something. Fawn instructs Ophelia to keep the golden key and wait for the right moment. He also gives her a new piece of chalk. He tells her that once she completes the next two tasks, she will soon return to being a princess. At this moment, Ophelia recalls what Mercedes had told her and starts to have some doubts. However, Fawn reassures her that he has no reason to deceive her. Back in her room, Ophelia opens the book and is horrified to see an image of a wound bleeding. At that same moment, Carmen begins to hemorrhage heavily. Luckily, the doctor intervenes just in time to stabilize her. This scene creates a link between the first task, involving the toad inside the giant tree, and the baby in Carmen's womb. Just as Ophelia cued the toad, Carmen's bleeding started, making it seem as though Fawn might not be as kind-hearted as it seems. To allow her mother to rest, Ophelia moves to another room to sleep. Mercedes comes to comfort her, and it's clear she has become a trusted friend for Ophelia. That night, Mercedes and the doctor head into the mountains to meet with the guerrilla fighters. Mercedes' brother greets them at the camp. The situation is critical. As Captain Vidal suspected, Mercedes delivers food and letters, while the doctor tends to the wounded. Due to the lack of medical supplies, one fighter's leg is severely infected and must be amputated without anesthesia, leaving him to rely solely on his willpower to endure the procedure. Faced with the grim reality, the doctor and Mercedes share their concerns. The doctor thinks that killing the captain would be futile, as another officer would simply replace him, failing to solve the underlying issue. He suggests that Mercedes and her brother should escape to another country. Mercedes hands her brother a spare key to the storeroom, warning him to be careful because the captain might be setting a trap. Her brother, however, is resolute, determined to continue the revolution even at great personal cost. With the estate's forces closing in, a fierce battle is imminent. That night, while Mercedes and the doctor are meeting with the guerrillas in the mountains, Ophelia struggles to sleep. To her surprise, Fawn appears in her room and learns that she hasn't completed the second task because of her mother's hemorrhage. Fawn gives her a mandrake root, explaining that it's a magical plant longing to become human. He instructs her to soak the root in fresh milk and place it under Carmen's bed, feeding it to drops of blood each morning to protect her mother and unborn brother. After explaining this, Fawn urges Ophelia to carry out the second task, attending a banquet in the underground lair of a monster. She must resist eating or drinking anything there and bring back a specific item. Task 2. Night Raid on the Devil's Palace. This task is extremely dangerous. Following the instructions from the Book of Crossroads, Ophelia must draw a door on the wall with a piece of chalk, creating an entrance to the underground palace. She has to return before the sand in the hourglass runs out. Ophelia finds herself in a banquet hall filled with tempting food. Fawn had warned her that even taking a single bite would lead to disaster. At the head of the table sits a terrifying, motionless creature without eyes, known as the Pale Man. Before him are two grotesque eyeballs on a plate. The murals on the walls and the pile of shoes nearby indicate that this monster is a man-eater. Knowing she can't waste time, Ophelia starts her task. She releases 3 fairies from her pouch to assist her. In a corner of the room, there are 3 locked doors. The fairies direct Ophelia to open the middle door. She retrieves the golden key from her previous task, but just as she is about to insert it, she changes her mind and opts for the left door instead. After some fumbling, she finally finds the item she needs for this task, a very sharp dagger. At this point, Ophelia should have left immediately, but she is irresistibly drawn to the delicious food on the table. Despite Fawn's warnings and the fairy's desperate attempts to stop her, she grabs a grape and eats it. The taste is incredibly sweet, but this single act unleashes calamity. Ophelia, lost in the moment, ignores the fairy's warnings, unaware of the impending danger behind her. To protect her, the fairies confront the pale man, buying Ophelia precious time. The cost, however, is high. Two fairies are brutally killed as Ophelia's actions have dire consequences. Panicked, she flees, with the monster in hot pursuit. The hourglass is nearly empty, and the door she came through slams shut. Desperate, Ophelia fumbles for her chalk, climbs a chair, and frantically draws a new door. Just as the monster is about to reach her, she escapes through the newly drawn door. Ophelia narrowly escapes and successfully completes the second task. The next morning, following Fawn's instructions, Ophelia soaks the mandrake root in milk. To her amazement, the root's movements mirror her mother's exactly. Finding this incredible, she continues to follow Fawn's directions and feeds the root with drops of blood. Dr. Ferrero comes to check on Carmen and discovers that she has suddenly improved. Captain Vidal, upon learning of this situation, tells the doctor that if it ever comes down to a choice between Carmen and the unborn child, he must ensure the child's survival. Hearing this, Ophelia feels deeply saddened. She realizes that her mother's new husband, the so-called stepfather, is a heartless brute who values life so little. She feels pity for her mother and her unborn brother. Leaning over her mother's belly, she prays for her brother not to harm their mother. From this moment, Ophelia's desire to become a princess is no longer just for herself. She wants to take her brother to her underground kingdom, to make him a prince and escape this cruel world together. Meanwhile, the guerrillas blow up the railway tracks but take nothing, leaving Captain Vidal puzzled. Soon he realizes it was a diversion. The guerrillas' real target is the storeroom. The camp is thrown into chaos. Upon inspecting the scene, Vidal finds that the storeroom lock was open with a key, indicating there is more than one key in possession. This fatal mistake makes Vidal realize there is a traitor among them. Without wasting time, he leads his men in pursuit. The guerrillas, unable to compete with the well-trained army, are quickly overpowered. Before long, Captain Vidal captures a young stutterer. That night, Fawn visits Ophelia to inquire about her progress, only to learn that she has broken the rules, causing two of the fairies to be eaten by the monster. Angrily, Fawn tells her that she can never return to the underground kingdom and that everything is over. With that, it vanishes into the darkness. Meanwhile, the young stutterer endures a night of brutal torture. Nearing death, Captain Vidal summons the doctor to treat him, intending to continue the interrogation afterward. As the doctor examines the boy, Vidal casually glances at the doctor's medicine bag and notices a vial of antibiotics. Unable to bear the boy's suffering any longer, the doctor, risking his own life, administers a lethal dose of poison to end the boy's agony. Vidal then compares the vial with those confiscated from the guerrillas, realizing they are identical. In wartime, such regulated supplies could only come from a limited source. Furious, Vidal confronts the doctor, demanding answers. As he heads out, a clumsy Ophelia upstairs accidentally spews milk. Vidal, hearing the noise, ascends to investigate. Perhaps Fawn's anger has withdrawn its magic, for the mandrake root lies lifeless. As Ophelia stares in confusion, Vidal roughly pulls her from under the bed. Discovering the mandrake root, Carmen, awakened by the commotion, pleads for Ophelia. Yet, the bizarre root frightens her. Ophelia explains that it's a magical root given by Fawn, but Vidal dismisses it as childish nonsense from reading too many fairy tales. Soothed by her mother, Vidal leaves the room. Ophelia, still just a 12-year-old girl, cries and begs her mother to take her away from this place. Carmen, in frustration, throws the mandrake root into the fire. As it burns, the root emits a painful cry, and simultaneously, Carmen collapses in agony. Ophelia screams for help, unaware that the doctor is already dead. Vidal receives news of Carmen's condition and calls for the military doctor. But it's too late. Carmen suffers a severe hemorrhage, her cries echoing down the hallway until they are silenced by the cry of a newborn. Vidal finally has the son he desperately wanted, but Ophelia has lost the only family she truly loved. After the funeral, Ophelia sorts through her mother's belongings and finds the bottle of sleeping drops the doctor had given her. The prescription was for only 2 drops per use, but now there was barely any left, revealing how many sleepless nights her mother had endured. At least now, her mother was free from this earthly suffering. Following the funeral, Captain Vidal turns his attention to rooting out another traitor, Mercedes. He informs her that the young stutterer had confessed. There was a spy right under his nose. Mercedes feels her heart leap into her throat as Vidal instructs her to fetch some wine from the storeroom. In her panic, she rises and leaves. Realizing she has been discovered, Mercedes decides to pack and escape that very night, planning to take Ophelia with her out of compassion. However, Vidal had released Mercedes during the day to see if she would lead them to other rebels. He now suspects Ophelia might also be colluding with the guerrillas and orders his men to keep a close watch on her, instructing them to kill her if anyone tries to rescue her. Still, he underestimates Mercedes, considering her just a woman and not a threat. Dismissing his guards, Vidal interrogates Mercedes alone. Finally, the knife Mercedes had hidden in her apron becomes useful. She frees herself from her bonds while Vidal is distracted, stabbing him from behind and then slashing his mouth. As Mercedes prepares to flee, the guards surround her. But at this critical moment, the guerrilla reinforcements arrive and launch a counterattack. Dawn is breaking, bringing a turning point for Ophelia. Fawn decides to grant her one last chance. He gives her a piece of chalk, instructing her to use it to escape and to bring her infant brother to the labyrinth. With no other escape route, the imprisoned Ophelia agrees to his plan. At the same time, Captain Vidal, despite his pain, stitches his own mouth shut. One of his men rushes in with urgent news. The guerrilla forces, numbering 50, are closing in on them, while Vidal's men are down to just 20. Just as Captain Vidal steps out, Ophelia pours her mother's sedative into his drink. With the imminent battle against the rebels, Vidal looks at his father's watch, determined to resist even unto death. He drinks the entire glass. Seeing this, Ophelia takes her baby brother and tries to escape. As the guerrilla attack begins, Vidal, realizing Ophelia is running with his son, rushes to grab him. Suddenly, he starts to feel dizzy and unstable. Staggering outside, he sees the guerrillas closing in. At that moment, his paternal instincts override all thoughts of military honor or warrior's glory. Desperately, he chases Ophelia into the labyrinth. At this moment, Ophelia encounters Fawn once more. He gives her the third and final task to sacrifice innocent blood. Fawn explains that tonight is the night when the moon is farthest. By offering her baby brother's innocent blood, she can open the portal to the underground kingdom and reclaim her position as princess. The dagger she acquired in this second task is meant to kill her brother. Standing on the brink of this opportunity, Ophelia hesitates. She hasn't even had a good look at her brother yet, despite the suffering he indirectly caused her, resulting in the loss of her mother. Ophelia cannot bring herself to sacrifice him for the throne. Seeing her reluctance, Fawn disappears. Captain Vidal finally catches up to them, taking the baby from her. He then coldly shoots Ophelia. As he exits the labyrinth, he is confronted by the rebels. Knowing his end is near, Vidal entrusts his son to Mercedes, instructing her to tell the boy about his father's sacrifice when he grows up. Mercedes interrupts him, saying she will never let the child know anything about him. A gunshot rings out, and Vidal falls dead. Mercedes finds Ophelia at the center of the labyrinth, lying in a pool of her own blood. As she is about to die, Ophelia hears someone calling her name. A golden light envelops her, and she finds herself in the legendary underground kingdom. Dressed in royal attire, before her, on a towering throne, are her parents. The task of sacrificing her brother's blood was merely a test. The truth their task was actually a test of the princess's character. Ophelia chose to sacrifice herself. The blood she shed was the purest and most innocent. With this, she completed all 3 tasks. Applause echoed around her. In the midst of the cheers, Ophelia truly became a princess. Back in reality, the rebels won their battle, and her brother was safe. Only Ophelia's body, now cold, remained as she left this world. The film ends with a relatively open ending. Perhaps Ophelia's physical body did die, and her soul entered another realm. Or maybe her return to the underground kingdom was just a fantasy in her dying moments. Throughout the movie, no one except Ophelia ever sees the fairies or Fawn. After Ophelia becomes a princess and takes her throne, the film cuts back to reality, showing Ophelia taking her last breath with Mercedes weeping beside her. This suggests that it might all have been in Ophelia's imagination. Which ending do you prefer?